This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, welcome out to the discussion today, the law review discussion. Appreciate each one of you that are with us. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of disinfecting in the law and whether businesses or others should be liable for disease. I think this is a area that's rapidly evolving in our society, and it's changed quite dramatically. I can see the societal precedent being set, which usually follows into legal precedent at some point. And so I wanted to go through some of the issues so that we can understand more of what's taking place and why it's taking place. So just 1 second, because it looks like we have some people that are having some technical difficulties getting in. So just 1 second here. All right. So with the topic today, just as a reminder that I feel strongly that freedom is an essential aspect of the American way of life, that it's an essential aspect of humanity in general. And I really do believe that we can still build good in the world and help to promote good principles in society. And through these discussions and through learning more, it's ways that we can help each other, we can learn and grow, and we can take steps to help preserve what the others have passed on to us, those that went before. And so my goal is that we can maintain a belief in our ability to change and influence society for good, and that we keep working towards those goals. So for the discussion, I feel strongly that it's important for us to discuss points we believe in, but also things that we disagree on, and that we maintain civility with that. We also ask that we avoid using labels or passing judgments on other ideologies or groups. That often turns people off and doesn't enable them to fully feel the truth, I don't think. And then we focus on the issues that we're talking about. There's so many things to talk about in society, obviously, but we focus on the ones for the discussion today. And then if there are other topics you'd like to talk about, let me know, and we can certainly do discussions on those as well at some point. So today we're going to jump in. This is a real situation that happened a few years ago. And Elias, could you read that situation for us?
PCA was a large manufacturer of peanut butter. They tested occasionally for salmonella or other problems with their peanut butter. After a significant amount of peanut butter had been processed and bottled, it was discovered that some of the peanut butter contained salmonella. The president of the company sent an email that said, "Just ship it." And the contaminated peanut butter was later linked to 714 cases of salmonella and potentially 9 deaths. Should liability be imposed? If so, what is the proper remedy?
Thanks. So this is there's, I guess peanut butter's been problematic over the years for salmonella. Peter Pan peanut butter before this had some salmonella cases with theirs, and they had ended up being fined a number of millions of dollars. But it was interesting. They were fined the money, Peter Pan was, and people who claimed to have contracted salmonella from the peanut butter could never prove it in court to the satisfaction of the judge. And so in the Peter Pan case, there wasn't a single person that got salmonella that was awarded any money for it, because the judge didn't believe their evidence. So I thought that was an interesting note, that the judge felt that Peter Pan sickened people, but he didn't believe anyone that claimed to have been sickened. But this was a case that came later, PCA. And so we got to the point where salmonella was discovered. They knew it was in a fair amount of the peanut butter, and the president of the company sent an email that said, just ship it. So the question here is, should liability be imposed in this situation? And if so, what would you say is the proper remedy for that? Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think they need to be held accountable, knowing that there was salmonella in there. I don't think it's right for people to ask more in compensation than what it costs them. And then it starts to get gray when you say potentially 9 deaths. You know, potentially, I think that would have to be defined more as to if you're going to require a specific compensation from the company. Things need to be determined as much as possible, specifically of what damage they caused.
Yeah, thanks. This situation was interesting because they did make clear that it was potentially 9 deaths. They couldn't fully confirm that, but it looked strongly like they had. And one of the issues with disease consistently, or illness, is that we don't have full proof. You know, with health and other things, attorneys can make quite a bit out of a case and always introduce doubt about what else could have caused it. And that was certainly something that happened in the Peter Pan case when the people tried to present their evidence of becoming sick. That they couldn't prove it fully that it came from the peanut butter. But what kind of, when we talk about liability here, is there anyone that thinks that they shouldn't be liable? Just curious in this situation.
Look, to me, it's a hard call. I think that they have to be able to prove that the people who died or the people who got sick came from that particular peanut butter. Is that possible in these situations?
Yeah, and that's the question. And again, from the health side, they have a very hard time proving exactly where it came from. The 714 cases of salmonella, they did have a consistent link that they all had eaten peanut butter from PCA during this time frame. Now, does that mean that it was the peanut butter that gave it to them, or is that just a strange coincidence? And when you get up to 714 people with that common thread, you can say, well, that's becoming less strange there. But from the side of the company discovered that there was salmonella somewhere in their peanut butter, and they still chose to ship it. So from that perspective, there's 2 ways to look at it to say, yeah, can we prove individual cases? Maybe not to the satisfaction of a court of law, but can we prove there was peanut butter in the peanut butter when it shipped? Yes. The PCA knew that itself.
To me, I think about in a court of law beyond reasonable doubt. The fact they confirmed that there was, and 714 cases being linked back to them of salmonella after they confirmed internally that there was a presence of salmonella, shows in my mind, at least based off of the information that we're given right now, that they are liable, at least to a significant, to a degree. But I don't know if those deaths, I don't know about that, but there's some liability there.
And so with the liability that we're discussing, should it be tied to how many people get sick? Should it just be the sheer fact that they sent out salmonella-laced peanut butter? And what are your thoughts on that? Should the penalty be based on whether it sickened 1 person, 1,000 people, 500,000 people? Or should it just be based on the fact that they were incredibly reckless in that situation.
Well, in my opinion, there should be some penalty for shipping peanut butter that they knew had salmonella. And then you get to, you know, if you get salmonella, you go to the hospital and you have to pay for it. And maybe you know, don't have the money to pay for whatever it costs you, then that might be an add-on or to, you know, what the company should pay. I mean, you have to think about, you know, the cost to the people also, but there should have been some sort of maybe liability, not as far as having to maybe show an inspector that their peanut butter was okay, if, you know, or some sort of penalty. Don't know.
And thanks for the thoughts there. It's a difficult question, one the law struggles with fairly often. There's different types of penalties they impose. They have ones that are meant to make people whole. So if you're sickened by it and you know, you incur medical costs or lose time at work or die, then those people want restitution, generally what they're talking about, being restored. There's also a penalty side of it, punitive type awards, where the law wants to punish companies by making it hurt, you know, so that they don't want to do that again. And it'd be interesting in a future discussion to go through the different types of, you know, theories for why different penalties are good or bad, or you know, why they would apply in different situations. But here, what happened was the government took a pretty significant leap. In the past, they had only fined companies. So with the Peter Pan case, for example, they had them, you know, millions of dollars they owed in fines. But then the judge said, yeah, but none of you that are claiming restitution can prove it, so I'm not going to award any of you money. And that's, you know, that's an interesting place to be, where the court's sitting on this big fine to disperse, and then it doesn't make anyone whole from the Peter Pan thing. So they say, yeah, we agree Peter Pan probably sickened people, but we don't believe it was you or you or you. But here, the court jumped and went a lot further and actually pursued people criminally in this situation, charged them with murder. And the president of the company that said just ship it, he was charged with crimes that could have resulted in a prison sentence of life in jail. And ultimately, he was a 61-year-old man at the time, and he was convicted for 28 years in prison. And he's currently serving that time in prison. His brother, who sold peanut butter as a broker, was also convicted and put in prison for, I don't know, 12 or 15 years. And then another lady at the company who helped try and cover up some of the evidence was sentenced to 5 years in prison over this. And this sent a shockwave throughout the corporate world, because previously in the corporate world, you were considered immune from a lot of these things as an individual. It's just the company that would be responsible. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether you think criminal liability and throwing people in jail is appropriate in this situation or not.
I mean, I don't know that that is a punishment that meets the crime. Maybe I don't understand the consequences of salmonella poisoning. I mean, I get that they said possible deaths, and you know, I just don't know how. Wow, murder and the rest of your life in prison. But maybe I'm not taking seriously these deaths because I just haven't seen the evidence that it caused deaths. I mean, he was totally reckless, and he does need to probably I don't know, just like, but life in prison. And I don't think he was trying to murder anyone. But I get that he was totally reckless. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, but and I also have concerns about the government when they fine. Where does that fine go? I mean, I just don't like the government having lots of reasons to collect money. And then the people who are actually suffering didn't get anything. That seems a little odd to me as well.
Yeah, and that was particularly the Peter Pan case. This case, people did get restitution. In one of the cases, they had enough evidence to convince the court that they did cause a death from the peanut butter. I guess the evidence was strong enough for that.
Well, can I ask a question? Like, if you cause a death, but he was negligent. Maybe he didn't understand the seriousness of salmonella. I think I don't either. But if you're not really trying to murder someone, but you cause a death through negligence, what is the typical sentence for something like that?
So in the past, prior to this case, there was not generally criminal liability for negligence. Criminal liability usually required some form of intent to actually kill or do something like that. And what was happening though in corporate America, so to give an example of a case that happened that was shocking to the world, where to my knowledge there was not criminal liability brought with this, but Ford manufactured a Pinto, and they started receiving reports that these Pintos exploded when they'd get rear-ended. And so Ford went and looked at it and investigated it and found out that, yeah, it turns out they designed something bad, and there was a bolt that when there was a long bolt that kind of stuck out of the frame, and when the car was rear-ended, just even a simple rear-end accident, that bolt would puncture in the gas tank and the cars would generally explode. And most people don't expect a car to explode in a rear-end accident, and these explosions would kill people. So Ford went and ran the numbers on it and said, what will it cost us to recall the Pinto and fix it? They did fix it moving forward, so all the new Pintos manufactured didn't have that problem. But the old ones, they said the cost of fixing it is so high. They did the statistics that said, based on the number of accidents the Pintos will be in and things, we anticipate X number of people dying. But we can pay out those deaths cheaper than we can recall and redo the Pinto. So there was actually a memo. Ford consciously made that decision and moved forward without recalling the Pinto. And when that was discovered, there was a huge outcry because these executives had essentially decided that life was less worth than the cost of fixing it. And so the court at that time imposed massive punitive damages on Ford, really raked him over the coals money-wise. But again, in corporate America, they weren't pursuing criminal liability against presidents and individual actors. And so this case represents a situation where America was getting fed up with that and really, really handed it to these guys. They were some of the very first to feel the brunt of that new shift in the law. But one of the reasons I bring this up right now, and not expecting us to have full answers to these questions, but it becomes far concerning when we look at the precedents right now with what a lot of people are proposing, or with what society is looking at. So we'll move on for a minute here, because again, we have someone that knows there's an issue, and we'll get to another hot topic in society with AIDS or other STDs. When an individual knows that they have something like AIDS, but they don't tell their partner.
Can I hit the pause button on that real quick? So
Yep.
This was one of the, back to the corporate thing, this is one of the concerns that even the founders have. If I remember correctly, it was George Washington. I'm assuming that company was some type of corporate entity. and
Yep.
you know, some type of corporation. And one of the concerns that the founders had with corporations is that they never died. You couldn't you couldn't charge them with murder. You couldn't die. They couldn't die. They would never die. They would, you know, they could live or in perpetuity, you know, for forever. And so, and it allowed them to have that exemption, almost from criminal behavior. So I'm going to say I think it's gotten to the time where when people are making decisions, knowing things are life and death issues, there has to be some sort of individual consequence for people and corporations. But I'll leave it at that statement.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's certainly a really important thing to think about with companies. And it is, you know, it is very true that there's been some very terrible decisions made because of that veil of liability that was generally there. And so the law is starting to backtrack on that and, you know, pursue more criminal actions now against business executives. But these same things, you know, spill over into our individual world. And both of these, the peanut butter case and the AIDS situation, will spill over into current society with coronavirus. It's going to show us some of the issues that we're currently grappling with. So in this situation, do you feel people have a duty to disclose these types of things to people, or should have a duty?
So I think in this situation, yes. You just barely, you know, if you're putting those actions of, in this case, John's partner, he wouldn't, there's a high chance, very high chance that they wouldn't have gotten together if they knew about his AIDS. As to the proper remedy, I have no idea. It seems like people go for extraordinary amounts of money nowadays, but I don't know what the proper remedy would be.
Well, thanks for those thoughts. Is there anyone that thinks that you should not have to disclose those things?
So did the other partner get the ailment?
Yeah, so the other partner gets AIDS. And is now sick, and then discovers that it came from John.
So I have a question or a thought, or I don't know. It seems to me like ethically, if you ask me ethically what someone should do, I would say ethically, yeah, the ethics should be that you disclose to someone that kind of situation. I mean, that kind of intimacy would require, ethically in my mind, that kind of respect of honesty. However, of course, people aren't always that ethical. But the problem is when we start getting litigious. I mean, I can see where litigious on every ethical thing is going to make everybody a criminal if you keep going to the nth degree. And at some point, it just seems to me like education of good ethics and good morals with certain limits on how far we go with all these mandates and these penalties. It just, am I making sense?
Yeah, it's an important point to think about, to say if we feel a strong moral wrong here, you know, we can say, ooh, that's pretty bad not to do that. The question then should always be asked, if the law steps in to mandate it, to make that ethical obligation now a legal obligation, what starts to happen in society at that point? Because there is a shift in society when, yeah, it might be an ethical thing, but what happens when it becomes a legal thing? So for example, if you see someone dying on the side of the road, should you stop and help and try and figure something out? Yes. But legally speaking, if you now have a legal duty to stop and act and do something and you don't, to your point, are you now a criminal? You've now broken the law, that person dies, and they say, well, you could have done something, you didn't, so we're going to charge you with negligent manslaughter or something else.
I think the situation with this though, he had a known disease. He knew he had it. It was incurable and contagious. John, if he had, I mean, I think most people know that chances were very, very high that his partner would get it. It's different. I think versus a situation where if you don't know you have a virus, and I'm sure we might get into that discussion later, or, you know, but in this situation, I think he should be held liable.
You want me at the table or?
Yeah, you can go.
So this was, I'm assuming this was in California. I'm just guessing, but in California, I believe there was a law that you have to notify, right? Didn't you say that was the case, Austin? Part of this.
So what's happening right now? It's interesting. There's a decent shift in this. For a long time, the law said, "Ooh, yeah, no, you need to tell people," and the law came down to say there's a duty to disclose. But right now, there's a big push to say you have no duty to disclose. They're calling it you're hot.
That's part
Instead
of what I
that you're
want to get
considered
to.
hot. And they're really pushing for no duty to disclose right now, just to be able to live your life and have no stigma associated with your illness. That's what they're saying.
Well, there's even a bigger movement than that. It's called giving the gift. So I would say I believe it was the law at the time, though, that individual was supposed to disclose. I'm going to say if you have a known disease, that level of disease, that yeah, legally he should have disclosed. That's kind of where, on that level of intimate level where it's passed on in that scenario, I would say yes, that you should be responsible for telling someone.
So just as a question, and this is open to anyone, do you think he should be liable with money damages, where he has to pay his partner money? Should it be criminal liability, where he goes to jail for not disclosing? And just between those two, those are basically the remedies the law has, is award money or send someone to jail. And what are your thoughts there on, one or the other, or both?
It seems like, because when you sell a house, there's actually a form that you have to fill out for disclosures that might be wrong with the house, things that have happened to the house, if there was a fire or something like that, or if there are things on the property that need to be disclosed. There's actually, and that's a legal form. I don't, this isn't a disease, but it's the same. To me, it's a similar thing. If you don't disclose to someone else that is going to be a partner or something like that in any kind of situation, you should be able to disclose all those kinds of things. And I think that if they, I'm not getting my thoughts straight here yet, but it seems like it would be a similar situation, that those disclosures would be absolutely necessary for a partnership to move on.
Yeah, and it's good, comparison to make. Real estate, we're expected to fully disclose everything.
Yeah.
With the house, that's one of the precedents we've set. But again, it's an interesting question, and we don't have to have an answer to it today on, money or criminal penalties. But both of them have different impacts on people. When it's civil and there's a fine or money is awarded to the partner, generally a civil action requires the partner bring the lawsuit. In a criminal action, the government can just find out what happened and step in and do whatever it wants, even if the partner doesn't want them to prosecute it. Typically, the government follows what the so-called, the victims want with that, but there are times where the victim doesn't want them to prosecute and the government still will. The government has that power. So it's something to think about. Keep it in your mind as we go through with these next situations. This is getting, this is a question, we're jumping ahead a little past coronavirus. We'll circle back to coronavirus. But this is to consider with where coronavirus is at. You think about it in light of that. And then think about what happens now when flu season hits in the winter with the precedent we're setting for coronavirus. So Mary's a single mother. She must report to work to keep her job. If she loses her job, she'll lose her home as well. She's living paycheck to paycheck, doing everything she can to make it. But she knows she'll be homeless. She doesn't have family to fall back on, nothing like that. Her child develops flu symptoms. Mary knows it, but she has no choice. She's got to get to work, and her child can't stay home alone, so she sends her kid to school. And later, a classmate contracts the flu, and then the classmate's grandmother, who watches that classmate, dies from the flu. And so we ask, again, with the precedents that are in place and societal notions and fear, we can ask, I guess, even just the first question: do you envision there being a lawsuit over this at some point? Do you foresee that coming?
I say no, because there's no way she can prove that it was Mary's daughter who gave the granddaughter the flu. It could have been somebody else in school.
Okay. So you can say that element of proof is very difficult to pin down.
Yeah, it's too wide. It's too far out there.
I would say that even if they could prove that it was through Mary's child, the flu is something that's within our society. Everyone well, not everyone, but it goes through our society on a continual basis. I don't think she'd be liable ethically. I don't think legally. I kind of struggle with it the more but I don't think should be held liable. It could be countered back that, well, we should also try to have good immune systems, but I think the flu is something that goes through our society on a continual basis, and we should always be on guard for it.
Austin, I'm not good. I'm not a lawyer, and so I wouldn't know like you guys know how that would be seen legally. But I know ever since this broke out, when I cough, I feel like I have to justify my cough. And I have allergies, and sometimes I don't stay hydrated enough. So it's not that I have the flu, and I've seen other people when they cough get nervous as well. Like almost like, uh-oh, don't think that I have this thing. Like there's a weird vibe going socially just when people cough, I think. And so I kind of think where you're like social, you create this mania thing over like even coffee, and you create all this fear in society. I'm not so sure, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not so sure that we couldn't see crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, and so yeah, a number of points in there. If you do cough outside right now, do you feel different than when you coughed a year ago? Is there a very different feeling in society?
Yes.
Well, I wonder if that different feeling is from more awareness. I mean, hey, everybody, I know something bad's going on, and this is where I am, not from like guilt or, I mean, I don't know what feelings everybody has. In medicine, that's how that's how I operate with my cohort for years. If someone's sneezing, you're like, oh, I just have allergies. But none of us think anything of it. None of us were like, get out of here. Like it's just, I think, increased awareness, increased sensitivity to the people that you're around, which I think is great. Like, I think it's great. I think it's great to be more aware.
So on that, to be more aware, to say, and for us to each take that own introspection to say, am I sick today, or is it allergies? Where am I really at today? Should I go out today or not? There can certainly be a good aspect where we do become aware, but I will say that with increased awareness for everyone, there's certainly the very real chance that it's not just awareness, it's blame that's being felt. And the blame becomes very, very dangerous, in my opinion anyways, to society, to human interaction, to the legal system. And right now, when we blame people for making us sick, it becomes, interactions change so much. And this is something that, as a family, we certainly experienced. We had a situation where we were exposed to someone with coronavirus. They found out after they had been in contact with us. And so we told some people that we had been in contact with since, said, hey, we've experienced some coronavirus or been exposed to it. And there was a lot of, the reactions ranged across the board for sure with people, but there was definitely some intense blame and intense feelings that went far beyond awareness with it. And so yes, can we have a situation where we push awareness but not blame? I think it might be possible. But in this situation, what happens in the law is the mentality of someone is, or I should say the mentality of an attorney. You walk into an attorney's office and you say, hey, I just discovered that this mom sent her kid to school with the flu. She knew she had it. My daughter got the flu shortly after. Everything lines up perfectly. I believe strongly it was from her, and then grandma dies from the flu. And grandma doesn't have contact with anyone except our kids. She's just at home and watches them. The attorney immediately says, ooh, it's their fault. They're the ones responsible for this. Let's go after them. And in my opinion, I 100% believe we'll have lawsuits over this very, very shortly. We already have lawsuits over coronavirus. They're already flying. And coronavirus, there's all kinds of factors to talk about, whether it's the same as the flu, whether it's far worse than the flu. Right now in society, there's facts on both sides. We won't argue that, but it's more to say, will the lawsuits come for the flu? I fully believe they will as an attorney. Anytime there's a chance to make money, an attorney will file a lawsuit.
I have a question.
Yep.
So then, like, say you wanted to be a tutor and you know that you could be charged with a lawsuit for someone getting sick if they're around you for any of these different scenarios, then would the legal thing to do be like have them sign a waiver to say, I realize I take the risk of being in your presence of getting an illness, and I'm going to waive you of responsibility of that? Like, is that the next step? To protect yourself from just, just so many crazy lawsuits?
It's certainly a good question. And a waiver will help if there's a lawsuit, but there's certainly no way to guarantee that it will hold up in a lawsuit. Because what the courts say is, the courts will say, for example, you might be able to waive from negligence. Let's just say that you had no idea you were sick yet. But if you woke up that morning and you knew that you were sick, then the law won't uphold waivers for knowing conduct generally. And so the allegation in the lawsuit will always be, well, she knew or he knew, whether or not you did. And whether or not they can prove that, that's a whole nother can of worms, whether they can prove it or not. But sometimes just getting sued is deadly in and of itself. But it's crazy expensive to defend yourself in a lawsuit. And the lawsuit alone can sink small businesses. The lawsuit alone can sink individuals, destroy lives. Again, you can be totally innocent, and the law under the law, you're totally innocent. But defending yourself is an extremely problematic situation. And so we'll jump on to keep going here for a second to talk about, this is based on a real lawsuit right now. Lawsuits against Walmart, but this person goes out and basically the only contact they have is at Walmart with humans. They don't interact with anyone else. And in this situation, put Target, but they take all their precautions, do other things. They contract coronavirus and then die. So there's a lawsuit pending currently. And this then starts to beg the question of, should businesses have a duty to keep people safe from viruses? Should there be a legal duty? So morally is one thing. We're talking legally right now.
Well, Austin, is there a definable way that if a business did these 10 measures, they would be keeping people safe? Like, is it defined?
So it's a good question. So let's say the law came out and said, if you do X, Y, and Z, if you disinfect every half hour, if you if you have people wear masks, if you have whatever, then boom, there's no liability to you. But what if the business, the attorneys then in that situation will still sue and say, okay, show me your logs to clean the surfaces. I want to see records that you did this every half hour. Oh, look at that. There's not an initial on that half hour block. An employee missed that. And they said, well, yeah, the employee had, there was an emergency in the store and we had to go deal with an unruly customer or something, but they were 5 minutes late on disinfecting. Those are the types of situations that will arise. So even if you say in the law, if you do these 10 things, it's virtually impossible for someone to do those 100% of the time. And then the question is, what happens if they miss one? If there's a 10-minute lapse or a 20-minute lapse or something, because just imagine being in Walmart and trying to get your people to a place where they're so diligent that they disinfect every half hour, everything.
Austin, is this case, is it an employee or is it a customer?
Customer.
So what's the responsibility for the customer choosing to go somewhere? Like what's the individual responsibility there?
Yeah, a great question. And I think it's a great question to look at with a lot of this. When we impose liability on businesses to disinfect, so for example, for my daughter's birthday, we went to Boondocks and they've been allowed to reopen. kind of makes me laugh that they're allowed to reopen based on other things going on. I certainly support businesses reopening, but based on some of the other things, we still keep closed. But in there, I'm watching these 16-year-olds that are running boondocks trying to disinfect. And as I watched, we were on the go-karts, and a group gets off, and this 16-year-old or 17-year-old boy is walking down, and he squirts some disinfectant on the seats, and just a little tiny spot of it on there. He walks up and down the whole row, and then he wipes off the seat, and then he lets people get on. Never disinfected the steering wheel, never did any of that. And I look at it and say, okay, I just witnessed myself that the steering wheel wasn't disinfected. And if I get on and get coronavirus from that, at what point do we say, well, Austin, you made a pretty conscientious choice there. You went out, you interacted with people. And at what point do we say, ooh, boondocks, you didn't, your guy didn't disinfect the steering wheel. We have it on camera here that he didn't disinfect the steering wheel. And so we're in this kind of battle right now between personal responsibility, and the more liability we impose on businesses, generally the less we're asking individuals to be responsible for their own decisions. And so in this balance that we look at, we need to see what is a healthy level of liability or responsibility to impose. Because as it stands, most people, for example, with food, we believe our food is 100% safe. We've abdicated from ourselves basically all responsibility to make it safe, except for maybe with eggs and meat. We feel we have to cook those, but everything else we feel will just be safe, and we don't take any precautions at our end. We've gotten rid of that personal responsibility and put it on business. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know, but certainly to your point, when you start looking at it, yeah, why did the individual go there? They made the decision to go. Did they have to go? Did they have curbside pickup options? Did they have home delivery options? Did they have other options? And at what point do we become responsible for saying, well, I went there? And it's certainly a great question, and one people grapple with, I think.
I might be the only one here, but I kind of want to go back to a simpler time when everyone didn't get turned into a hypochondriac, and when when maybe there were a lot of people who died because there was negligence, but I just think my heart and brain and soul would be more free if I mean, this sounds like, can I get off this crazy planet if we're gonna get like this? This is not fun for me.
Yeah, and I think that, so sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, since we are older, and I have pre-existing conditions, but we do go out to the store, and it's probably a little bit. I want to see my groceries, so that's why I don't want to have curbside pickup. But I could. I mean, I could do that. But I was thinking, since Costco has said everybody has to wear masks to come in and shop at Costco, and we went the last time to Costco, and I felt so free. I felt so happy because everybody in the store was trying to social distance and had their masks on, and it gave me a great sense of feeling free and positive. And so that's maybe the people who didn't want to wear a mask didn't feel free. So I just have to say that I came home and told people how a wonderful experience it was for me to go to Costco and not be worrying about everybody else, what was going to happen to me because I was there.
Yeah, and that's, it's a very real situation to look at, where there are people who, with illnesses out there, could suffer a life sentence at home, where they're just stuck there. And yes, I think that it's very easy to say, yeah, you should just stay home if you're concerned about things. But in reality, all of us are social beings. Humans are by nature. We need to get out. We need to see people. We need to, see our own groceries, that kind of thing. And could I have stayed home today? Yes. Can I stay home for 3, 4, 5 years? No. Does that mean that the rest of the world needs to wear a mask, not wear a mask? Again, like you say, there are people that feel very constrained by the masks, and they feel very not free in those. But there are other people who it brings a sense of freedom too. And so when we talk about these things and this trend in society, these are all important things to realize for all the different types of people in society. There's people that are very healthy, young, not concerned about this. There's people that are in situations where they're more frail, and it could be a very dangerous thing if they get coronavirus, or deadly for them. Coronavirus definitely has a high impact in certain populations.
I'd like to comment. So it's interesting how you preface this whole conversation, at least this last half, bringing up AIDS, and then going to our current situation with coronavirus. So I want to jump back to AIDS real quick. So one of the things you can't do with AIDS, or at least in the past you've not supposed to do or been able to do, is if you have AIDS, you can't give blood. You're supposed to notify your partner, right? You don't necessarily have to tell everyone you interact with, because medically speaking, kind of the current understanding is it's direct blood or body fluid transmission, correct? It's not just sneezing. And so I do think that, let's say that there's some type of plague, bubonic plague, that someone has, where if you even touch them, you could get sick and die. I think there is a level of, so going back to AIDS, you can't give blood. If you give blood, at least in the past, you could be held, if I understood correctly, you could be held for murder. So not just civilly liable, but you could be criminally liable. And there have been people that have received, especially back in the 80s and maybe even the 90s, from blood transmissions, people that received AIDS and passed away from that. But we're now in a situation where, as of a year ago, I was listening to sports radio. There's two guys who grew up on farms, and the whole mentality was, unless your voice was completely shot and you couldn't talk, you went in to do your radio show. That was the mentality of myself and basically every company I worked at, is unless you have a fever that's really diminishing your ability to work, you go into work and work. Now with coronavirus, we take your temperature at the door going in to many different places. You have to wear a mask. I I understand that there is, my opinion is if you're in a situation where you need to be outdoors or you need to interact with people, we're social people, we have to get it done. There's a big distinction between, if I touch someone, there's a good chance they're going to get a disease that they could die, versus I go out and just interact with the world, I'm going to come across disease, meaning flu, anything along those lines. And then we even throw in the mask wearing. Well, the mainstream media sure wants to tell us that there is no issues wearing masks, but there are many doctors that are being and many medical people that are saying, actually, no, there are issues for people wearing masks for extended period of time. So I'm just going to say, to me, there's a definite difference, but those lines are being blurred right now.
Yeah, that's, it's really great to discuss the principles of AIDS versus basically if you do certain things, there's 100%, almost 100%, transmission factor versus coronavirus. But to your point about the bubonic plague, it's one I think about often. I think if this wasn't coronavirus, if this was Ebola, now if this was Ebola going through society right now, how would I feel about it? And I think the thing to realize with coronavirus, one of the reasons there's such strong disagreement over coronavirus is because to some people with pre-existing conditions or in certain age groups, coronavirus might be, coronavirus is much more deadly. Whether it approaches Ebola deadly, I don't know. I haven't run the numbers and things. But for some people, any contact to them with someone with coronavirus could be just as deadly as, in their mind, as an Ebola contact or a bubonic plague contact. Whereas other people are just going, it's just kind of like getting a cold and the flu, and you move on. And I think one of the reasons we're so splintered right now as society is because coronavirus targets or is most deadly among certain people and certain groups. And so then there's very different feelings and opinions when it comes to coronavirus that, is it the flu that's just commonplace everywhere out there? Is it the bubonic plague? Is it somewhere in between? And from a statistical perspective, if we were just purely statistical like Ford and said, 80% of the people won't have a problem with this, we'll just move on. We've had outcries over that in the past in society, over that type of principle, where people say, no, life's more important than some money. And so then we have the business shutdowns and we have these other things come where we say, yeah, we're valuing life super high. But then we start to see all kinds of other effects come from that. We start to see financial issues where people are literally going to lose their homes. And on the business shutdown side, those that have been okay with the business shutdown, for the most part, have jobs that have stayed intact. Those that are really troubled by it have jobs that they've lost. And there's no real hope for them finding a job anytime soon. And unemployment runs out, other things run out at some point. And there's going to be a pretty painful wave of foreclosures and other things that come with this coronavirus stuff, the shutdowns and things. And the thing that I really want to help with is I really want us to understand the different views and needs and consequences that come from these decisions. There are people that are impacted severely on all sides of any of the coronavirus decisions. And it's a pretty serious moral issue to wrestle with. It's a health issue, it's a legal issue, it's a moral issue. People always talk about how they're so upset that we politicize this in America. Well, it's very political because it involves so much law, it involves so much liability, it involves so many of these things that now, if you're a tutor, can you be sued if you're helping someone? And if you're a business and you just need people at the office to work, let's just say you're a small business, you have 5 employees. If one of them's not there, your business just isn't going to function. It will shut its doors. So the boss says, hey, Jim, you got to come into work. And Jim doesn't want to. Should the employer be able to let him go, terminate him? Should he be required to keep his job? Because if he's required to keep his job and he's not there working and the job doesn't get done, then the business is going to fold. And if Jim does go to work and gets sick, turns out someone else there is sick and he gets sick, should he be able to sue his employer because he was required to come in? And, we can look at companies, big companies like Wells Fargo, and say, yeah, you've got the ability to not have people show up and do different things. But my heart goes out to the small business owners, 3, 4, 5 people. Every single one of them is crazy necessary to keep the business running. And that's about half of America, at least. The small business group employs a lot of Americans. And they're just in little situation, they're mom and pop shops. And they're super worried about it. And so, we won't necessarily have answers to all those today, but in evaluating these things, I think it's very important to be honest about the damage that comes to all sides of the issue in this situation. there's real damage, there's real concern. And if we're not aware of the other sides, if we're not aware of the fact that wearing masks help a certain subset of the population, wearing masks might hurt a certain subset of the population, it might infringe on liberties, it might set precedents. There's a lot at play. But if we can't have the discussion and be aware of the realities of coronavirus, both the economic, the legal, the health, then I think that we just stay stuck in these circles and these battles. So to me, the goal is ultimately that we get to a place, where we won't have time to fully discuss this today because we're out of time today. But these are some thoughts you can think about. Should we be requiring businesses to disinfect every 30 minutes or 60 minutes? Should we encourage people to say, why don't you just take a disinfectant wipe with you, and whatever you need to touch, disinfect it before you do it? What if you put that responsibility on people?
So I want to throw this in that I don't think that, so we have the media, and it's happened here in Utah. I'm just going to hopefully I can make this real quick. It's happened here in Utah, and it was happening on a national level. We had Dr. Fauci and the epidemiologists who are just looking at the medical side. We've got our own epidemiologist here for the state. I forget the lady's name, but the governor was coming out and doing every couple of days, or even daily sometimes, doing a meeting as well. And the media themselves, they get paid when people are watching. The more people that watch, more people are at home, the more they can increase their advertising for the media. So what my point is part of the responsibility of government is looking at the whole thing. And one thing that was never brought up and has never been brought up is, for every million people that are out of work, I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I've heard 2 statistics and 2 studies. I mean, this is like Stanford studies. It's somewhere between 7 and 30,000 people will die for every million people that are unemployed. And so this is maybe a broader discussion later, but that's one thing that hasn't been discussed very well with these shutdowns is that type of cost. So
and thanks for that. I think that the really important takeaway there is, it's fascinating to watch with coronavirus because health professionals are making decisions for a wide range of areas that they have no expertise in, economy, law, all these things. And I'm not saying that their input's not valuable, but to your point, the lawmaker's responsibility is to balance, in my opinion, the input from all the different experts, to look at it and say, okay, health is saying this, but what else? What's the economic toll? What's the legal toll? What's the toll on mental health? Because even the American Pediatrics Association has highly recommended that kids go back to school in the fall in person. They said the toll on the psyche of the child is so strained by not being with people that they feel it's more harmful than the coronavirus would be to them.
And even Fauci even said, someone asked him that question, if I remember correctly, and he said, that's not my area of expertise. When someone brought up those type of statistics, he goes, that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, and so the one takeaway that I'd really push is that the best decisions will be made when we listen to the most number of voices. If we pick one field, for example, if you said, okay, attorneys, you know the law, so we're going to put you in charge of businesses, the cost of goods would skyrocket because every attorney would insist that the business be 100% compliant. To be 100% compliant is so crazy expensive. And businesses every day choose the risks they run, on the laws that they break or don't break, whether they get a license in the city or not, or if they get their hands slapped later, whatever. But the attorney would say, let's get fully compliant. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, yeah, never touch that. And there'd be so few businesses that would ever exist. Most small businesses would never exist if they were run by an attorney, because the attorney would be hyper focused on one area and would miss the bigger, the bigger picture. So that is a point that I think we should really, really be aware of and just ask for it. We might agree with what the medical professionals say, that's fine. But we should still really push for the process to include reports and input and feedback from a wide variety of people that are impacted. We need to understand the true impacts and understand what we're doing to be able to make good decisions. But ultimately, I want to leave you with this question, and this is, I think, and this was brought up to an extent, but what happens to our own psyche, to our own mind, when we view others as being responsible for our own health? And this is where it gets into the blame that we talked about. There's a serious, from my perspective and my concern, is that the more the law mandates liability for viruses and things, the more we start to fear each other. We live in fear. There's fear that comes with it. And again, can we get to a place where there's awareness, where there's good that comes from it? We can, but if I feel that my life is just in someone else's hands, if my life is in the hands of someone that wears a mask or not, I feel incredibly out of control and I feel incredibly powerless. I turn to the government and want a lot of force and things. And similarly, if I feel that my life's totally in the hands of my partner and they need to disclose stuff on whether I get a disease or not, there are real effects to society. And I can tell when I walk in a grocery store, the fear is palpable, at least to me. I can feel it. People are afraid of each other. Not a single person will look me in the eye anymore. I cannot make eye contact with any single person in a grocery store. And to me, there is something happening that at least to me, is very concerning. And that fear will eventually find its way into the law unless we work to correct it. We work to think people to still speak to them. We can't just smile at someone now because they can't see it. But we have to actually be very proactive about sending positive communications back, helping to break down this fear that's come. But we can certainly continue to think about that question. But I think if you ponder on that and ponder on ways that you can help set a positive tone for society and a positive balance, it can really help, because we're searching for light right now. We're searching for sources of goodness and good examples, because the world's grappling with, wrestling with these problems that have come from precedent, that have come from these other situations. And we found ourselves here now with the coronavirus that is very deadly to some, not a concern at all to others. And it puts us in a fascinating place in society. So thanks for joining the discussion today. We certainly appreciate it. And we will jump in again next week to talk about these things, some more of these things, the legal stuff. But if you have items, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. We'd love to base these on your input as well. So have a great week, and we will talk to you later.
Thanks, Austin.
Yeah, thank you, Austin, and all the rest who contributed.
Thanks, Austin. Do you have a couple minutes to chat, whether it be here or offline, and you want to stop recording?